My name is Serafina Rowe, and for most of my life, I was a visitor in my own family. It's a strange thing to admit, like confessing you've been a ghost in your own home, drifting through hallways and conversations, present in body but absent in spirit. I grew up in the misty embrace of Portland, Oregon, a city of roses and persistent, gentle rain, but the climate inside our house was always arid and cold. My mother, Isolde, could orchestrate a silence so profound it felt like a punishment. My father, Leopold, could dismantle my confidence with a single, disappointed sigh. And my sister, Livia, she was the sun around which our small, tense solar system revolved. The day it all shattered began, as most of our family tragedies did, with a performance. We were in the hushed, sterile lobby of Bridgeview Medical Center, a place that smelled of antiseptic and wilting flowers. Livia was upstairs in the oncology wing, battling a rare form of liver disease that had stalked her for the better part of a year. I was sitting in a vinyl chair, clutching a folder of my own medical information, my heart a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. "How can you be so selfish?" Isolde's voice, a carefully modulated weapon, sliced through the quiet. She wasn't shouting, not yet. That was reserved for the grand finale. This was the overture. She snatched the folder from my hands, her fingers like talons. "Your sister is upstairs, fighting for her life, and you're hesitating? You're weighing your options." I didn't answer. I looked past her at the rain-streaked windows, at the blurred lights of the city. I had learned long ago that my words were just fuel for her fire. Silence was my only shield. My father stood beside her, his arms crossed, his posture a bulwark of silent judgment. "This family has given you everything, Serafina. A home. An education. A life you wouldn't have had otherwise." The unspoken addendum hung in the air, and now it's time to pay up. The thing was, I had already tried to pay. The moment I heard Livia was sick, months ago, I had driven to a clinic on the other side of the city and had myself tested for compatibility. I did it quietly, without fanfare, without telling them. I wanted it to be a gift, freely given, if I was a match. If not, I wanted to spare them the drama of a false hope. The results had come back a week later. I was not a match. Not even close. The email from the National Registry was clinical, definitive, and I had saved it in a folder on my laptop, a small, sad secret. I had planned to tell them, to show them the proof, and then help them navigate the national donor list. But the opportunity never felt right. Their grief was a fortress, and I was never allowed inside, only commanded to serve at its gates. And now, seeing the calculated fury in my mother's eyes, I realized they wouldn't have believed me anyway. They didn't want a solution. They wanted a sacrifice. My sacrifice. "You're letting her die," Isolde's voice rose, cracking with practiced anguish. Heads turned. A nurse pushing a cart paused. A man reading a newspaper lowered it slightly. The performance had begun. She ripped the top page of my medical history from the folder. Then another. The crisp, tearing sound echoed in the cavernous lobby. "You are letting your own sister die." The papers, pieces of my life documented in sterile, black and white print, fluttered to the floor around my feet. They looked like fallen leaves in winter. I stared at them, a strange calm settling over me. It was the calm that comes after the storm has already hit, when all you can do is survey the wreckage. My father stepped forward, his voice low and laced with a contempt that was far more wounding than my mother's theatrics. "You were always a disappointment, Serafina. We thought you'd grow out of it, but you're just a selfish, selfish girl." I looked from his face to my mother's, then at the scattered pieces of paper. And in that moment, something inside me, something I had kept locked away for years, finally clicked open. This wasn't about a liver. It had never been just about a liver. This was about ownership. I bent down slowly, my movements deliberate, and began to gather the torn pages. My hands were steady. I wasn't gathering them out of shame, but out of a sudden, fierce need for evidence. "For the record." "What are you doing?" Isolde hissed, her performance faltering for a second. I looked up at her, my eyes meeting hers directly for the first time that morning. "I'm picking up the pieces," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "It's what I've always done." She blinked, momentarily thrown off script. Then the rage returned, righteous and blinding. You'll regret this for the rest of your life. When she's gone, you'll have to live with the fact that you did nothing. I stood up, the torn papers clutched in my hand. From the corner of my eye, I could see the third-floor window of the oncology wing. I imagined Livia in her bed, probably watching a movie on her tablet, pale but still wearing that faint, knowing smirk she always had when I was in trouble. The smirk that said, "See? I'm still the center of the universe. And you're just a speck of dust in my orbit." That smirk had haunted my childhood. It was there when she told a teacher I'd cheated on a test I'd actually helped her study for. It was there when she accidentally spilled grape juice on the one formal dress I owned, an hour before my first school dance. It was there when, at a family dinner, she'd announced to a table full of relatives that I was adopted, a fact my parents hadn't yet found the courage to tell me themselves. She had laughed then, a bright, tinkling sound, as my world crumbled around me. I remember a lot of moments I said to my mother, the words tasting strange and powerful on my tongue. And none of them felt like family. With that, I turned and walked away. Not toward the exit, but toward the information desk. I could feel their eyes on my back, a burning, accusatory weight. But for the first time, it didn't make me stoop. I felt my spine straighten, vertebrae by vertebrae, as if I were learning to stand tall for the very first time. The clock on the wall read 9:17 a.m. I knew I would remember that time. It was the moment I stopped being a visitor in their lives and started the long, quiet journey of building my own. I didn't go far. I found a small, empty waiting area in a quieter wing of the hospital, a place meant for the families of surgery patients. It was deserted. I sat down and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The torn papers in my hand were a mess, but I carefully smoothed them out on the seat beside me, trying to piece them back together like a puzzle with no picture. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. I knew it would be a barrage of texts from them, a cascade of guilt and threats. Instead, I opened my email and found the message I'd been guarding for months. Subject: National Organ Registry, Donor Compatibility Results. I stared at the bolded, underlined words, not a compatible match. I took a screenshot. Then I forwarded the original email to my one true ally in the world, my friend Zara, a fiercely loyal lawyer who had seen me through more than one of my family's manufactured crises. My message was simple: it's happening. They're trying to force it. Here's the proof I was never a match to begin with. Stand by. Her reply came back in under a minute. I've got your back, S. What do you need? Just for you to have this, I typed back. For the record. A memory surfaced, unbidden. I was 10 years old. Our family had a small rose garden, my father's pride and joy. One afternoon, Livia and I were playing, and she accidentally trampled a prize-winning rose bush. When my father came out and saw the broken stems, his face clouded over. Before I could say a word, Livia burst into tears and pointed at me. Serafina did it. She was being clumsy. I remember standing there, mute with shock, as my father scolded me, telling me I was careless and ungrateful for the beauty he tried to cultivate. He made me spend the rest of the weekend weeding the entire garden as punishment. Livia watched from her bedroom window, that familiar, triumphant smirk on her face. They hadn't just ignored the truth, they had actively cultivated a false one, a narrative in which Livia was the fragile bloom and I was the careless weed, always encroaching, always needing to be pulled. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text, but an email with a subject line that made my blood run cold. Thinking of you. Found this. It was from Clara, my best friend from middle school. Her family had moved to Arizona the summer before we started high school, and we'd lost touch over the years. I opened it, my hands trembling slightly. The email was short. Serafina, I saw your mom's post on Facebook about Livia's fundraising page. It brought back a lot of memories. I was cleaning out my parents' attic last month and found my old diaries. I thought you should have this. I never knew if I should have said something back then. I'm sorry I didn't. Attached was a scanned image of a diary page, dated May 12th, over a decade ago. Clara's loopy, teenage handwriting was unmistakable. Serafina came to school today with a long-sleeved shirt, even though it's super hot. She said she was cold. During gym, I saw why. There's a huge, dark bruise on her arm, shaped like fingers. She saw me looking and pulled her sleeve down fast. She said she fell down the stairs. But later, I heard Livia bragging to Becca S. that she'd put Serafina in her place for borrowing her sweater without asking. Livia said their mom saw it happen and just told Serafina she should have known better. It makes me feel sick. I wish I could do something, but Serafina made me promise not to tell. She said it would only make things worse. I stared at the scan page, at the ghost of a teenage girl who was so terrified of making things worse that she chose to suffer in silence. I had forgotten that specific incident, buried it under 100 others just like it. But seeing it there, in someone else's words, made it undeniably real. It wasn't a misremembered pain or a child's exaggeration. It was a fact. It had happened. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about a liver anymore. This was about a lifetime of being told my reality wasn't real. I saved the image, my fingers moving with a new sense of purpose. I created a new folder on my phone, titling it simply The Record. I added the screenshot of the non-match email. I added a copy of the torn pages I had photographed. Then I began to write. Not a furious screed, but a calm, chronological account of the day's events, starting with the 9:17 a.m. confrontation in the lobby. I detailed every word, every action. My voice, for so long silenced, began to fill the blank page. When I finished, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness. My own chief witness. I knew I couldn't stay hidden in this quiet corner forever. I had to face them again. But this time, I wouldn't be armed with silence. I would be armed with the truth. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and walked back toward the main part of the hospital, my phone held in my hand not like a shield, but like a lantern in the dark. My first stop was the 3rd floor. I walked to the nurses' station, a small island of calm in the sea of medical urgency. A kind-faced woman with tired eyes looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'd like to speak with Dr. Lena Petrova, Livia Rowe's primary physician." "Is she expecting you?" "No, but it's urgent." She must have seen something in my face, a resolve that brooked no argument. She picked up the phone. A few minutes later, a woman in a white coat with a calm, intelligent face emerged from a nearby office. "Dr. Petrova." "Ms. Rowe," she said, her expression neutral. "Can we speak in my office?" I followed her into a small, cluttered room filled with medical journals and a single, thriving orchid on the windowsill. She closed the door and gestured for me to sit. "My parents," I began, choosing my words carefully, "are under the impression that I am a viable liver donor for my sister. They are trying to pressure me into undergoing surgery." Dr. Petrova's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened with focus. The initial familial screening did suggest a potential for compatibility, which is why we moved forward with scheduling a full evaluation for you. "That's the thing, doctor," I said, pulling out my phone. I already had the full evaluation. Months ago. I handed her the phone, the email from the registry displayed on the screen. She took it, her brow furrowing slightly as she read. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the date the email was sent. "This was sent to you in October," she said, more a statement than a question. "Yes." I listed my mother, Isolde Rowe, as my secondary contact on the registry form. Standard procedure. The registry confirmed a copy was sent to her email address as well. Dr. Petrova handed the phone back to me, her face a mask of professionalism, but I could see a flicker of something in her eyes, dismay, perhaps even anger. "Your mother's intake form for Livia's current admission states that you had not yet been tested and that you were scheduled for your first evaluation today." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. It wasn't just pressure. It wasn't just manipulation. It was a calculated, deliberate lie. She knew. For months, my mother had known I wasn't a match, and she had built this entire, agonizing drama on a foundation of deceit. She had dragged me here, humiliated me, allowed my father to berate me, all while holding the truth in her inbox. "I see," I said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "Serafina," Dr. Petrova said, her tone softening slightly. From a medical ethics standpoint, this is a very serious issue. Withholding this kind of information is unconscionable. It puts both you and the care team in an impossible position and, more importantly, it wastes critical time that we could be using to find a viable donor for Livia on the national list. Can I get a copy of that intake form? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The one my mother filled out? I'll do better, she said, her face set with determination. I will document this entire conversation in your sister's official file. And I will provide you with a printed, notarized copy of both the registry's original finding and your mother's contradictory intake statement. It will be ready for you within the hour. I nodded, unable to speak. I felt a wave of gratitude so profound it almost brought me to my tears. For the first time all day, I wasn't alone in this. Someone in a position of authority saw the truth and was willing to validate it. When I left her office, the folder of notarized documents tucked securely under my arm, I walked directly to Livia's room. I didn't knock. I just pushed the door open and stepped inside. She was sitting up in bed, scrolling through her phone, the faint blue light illuminating her pale face. She looked up, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flash of surprise before her usual mask of bored indifference settled back into place. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy. I didn't answer her question. I just stood in the doorway and looked at her. "Mom knew," I said quietly. "She's known for months that I'm not a match." She got the same email I did. Livia's thumb paused over her phone screen. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the device in her hand. "And you let her do it," I continued, the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. "You let her drag me here. You let her put on that show in the lobby. You both knew." She finally looked up, her eyes, so much like our mother's, holding a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't guilt. It was more like annoyance, as if I were a puzzle she was tired of trying to solve. "You still came, didn't you?" she murmured, and then turned her attention back to her phone. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. It wasn't about her life. It was about my loyalty. It was a test, and in their eyes, I had failed. I didn't say another word. I just backed out of the room and gently closed the door. The confrontation I had been dreading my whole life had finally happened, and it wasn't a screaming match. It was a quiet, devastating confirmation of a truth I had always known but never dared to voice. To them, I was not a person. I was a resource. And I had just been declared depleted. As I walked toward the elevator, I saw Isolde and Leopold approaching from the other end of the hall. My mother was holding a clipboard, a pen poised. My father's face was a stony mask. The final act was about to begin. "There you are," Isolde said, her voice dripping with false relief. "We have the consent forms. We just need your signature." She held the clipboard out to me. I looked down at the paper, at the neat lines and boxes, at the space at the bottom that was waiting to claim a piece of me. I looked back up at her and gave a small, sad shake of my head. "No." Her face tightened. "Serafina, do not do this. This is not the time for your dramatics." "It's not drama," I said, clutching the folder from Dr. Petrova's office to my chest. "It's the truth. And you've had it all along." Leopold stepped forward, his shadow falling over me. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You will sign this," he said, his voice a low growl. "You will do your duty to this family." "Let go of me," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Not until you do the right thing." "Leopold, stop it," a sharp voice cut in. It was a nurse, the same one from the nurses' station. She was standing a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression stern. "You cannot handle a patient or a visitor like that in this hospital." My father let go of my arm as if it were hot iron. His face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. Isolde turned on the nurse. "This is a family matter. My daughter is dying, and her sister is refusing to help." The nurse's gaze shifted to me. Her eyes were full of a calm, steady understanding. "Is that what's happening, Ms. Rowe?" I took a deep breath. "No," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound clarity. "What's happening is that my family is trying to coerce me into a medical procedure for which I am not a compatible candidate, a fact they have deliberately concealed from me and from this hospital." I held up the folder. "And I have the proof." The color drained from Isolde's face. Leopold stared at the folder as if it were a snake. The nurse gave a single, decisive nod. I think you all need to have a conversation with our patient advocate and a representative from our legal department, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Right now. I watched as their carefully constructed world began to crumble, not with a bang, but with the quiet, irrefutable weight of a single piece of paper. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't screamed. I had simply spoken the truth. And it was, I realized, the most powerful thing I had ever done. The 24 hours that followed were a blur of quiet, formal meetings in sterile conference rooms. Zara was by my side, a calm, steady presence who translated the legalese and deflected the passive-aggressive barbs from the hospital's administrators. My parents were there, but they were different. The fire had gone out of Isolde. She sat hunched and silent, her face a pale mask of shock. Leopold's bluster had evaporated, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. They had been caught, and they didn't know the script for this new play. The hospital, eager to avoid a lawsuit and a public relations nightmare, moved with chilling efficiency. They confirmed the authenticity of my documents. They interviewed Dr. Petrova. They placed a formal note of censure in my parents' file as legal guardians of a patient. But the most stunning revelation was yet to come. Late that afternoon, Dr. Petrova asked to meet with me alone. We sat in the same office, the orchids still blooming defiantly on the windowsill. Serafina, she began, her face somber. When we uncovered this discrepancy, we ran your initial blood work against your parents on file. We also ran it through a more comprehensive genetic panel. There was a flag, something we felt compelled to follow up on. She paused, taking a deep breath. I don't know how to tell you this gently, so I will just tell you the truth. Leopold and Isolde Rowe are not your biological parents. The 6 words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. You are not their biological daughter. I think I laughed. A short, sharp, humorless sound. It was the only response my body could muster. All the pieces of my life, all the moments of feeling like an outsider, an imposter, a visitor, they all slammed into place. The different hair color. The different shaped eyes. The story of my adoption that Livia had wielded like a weapon, which my parents had later confirmed in a terse, shamefaced conversation, telling me I was the daughter of a distant cousin who fell on hard times. Another lie. It had all been lies. So I'm not even her sister, I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Biologically, no, Dr. Petrova confirmed gently. Which means there was never any significant chance you would be a match for the liver transplant. It was, from a medical standpoint, a statistical impossibility from the very beginning. A statistical impossibility. My entire life in this family, the constant pressure to be grateful, to earn my keep, to pay my dues, all of it had culminated in them demanding I give up a part of my body for a cause that was medically hopeless from the start. I didn't cry. The capacity for tears felt like a distant country I could no longer visit. I just felt a profound, hollowed-out clarity. I was free. Their hold on me, built on a foundation of biological obligation and secret shame, had just crumbled into dust. Thank you, I said to Dr. Petrova, the words feeling utterly inadequate. Thank you for telling me. That evening, the hospital, in a move to control the narrative, called a small press conference. They spoke of their commitment to ethical patient care and announced the successful placement of Livia on the national priority list for a donor liver. My parents stood behind the hospital administrator, looking diminished and gray. They were playing the part of grieving, concerned parents to the very end. I watched it on my phone from a coffee shop a block away. They never mentioned my name. I had been completely erased from the story. But I wasn't gone. I paid for my coffee, left the shop, and walked back to the hospital. I didn't use the main entrance. I used a side door and made my way to the small media room where a few local reporters were still packing up their equipment. Zara was waiting for me, just as we'd planned. She gave me a single, questioning look. Are you sure? I nodded. I walked to the podium, which was still set up. A reporter from a local news station turned, his microphone still in his hand. Can I help you, miss? Yes, I said, my voice clear and steady. amplified slightly by the still active microphone. My name is Serafina Rowe, and you've just heard one side of the story. I'm here to tell you the rest of it. I laid out my documents on the podium. The non-match email, the forged intake form, the notarized statement from Dr. Petrova, and finally, a copy of the genetic report. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't perform my pain. I just stated the facts, one after another, building a case not for revenge, but for the simple, undeniable truth. I was brought into this family as an infant, a secret they kept until they couldn't, I concluded, my gaze sweeping over the small, stunned audience. I was raised to believe I owed them a debt. This week, they tried to collect, demanding a piece of my body to save a sister I am not related to, for a transplant that was medically impossible. They did this knowing the truth. They did this by lying, by forging documents, and by trying to shame me into silence. I paused, taking a breath. I don't want an apology. I don't want anything from them at all. I just want the record to be set straight. My body is not a debt to be repaid. My life is my own. I turned and walked away from the podium, leaving the stunned silence and the flurry of questions behind me. As I reached the door, I glanced back. Isolde had collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands. Leopold stood frozen, a statue of a man whose world had just been dismantled. I walked out into the cool Portland evening, the scent of damp earth and roses filling the air. The rain had stopped. For the first time, I felt the gentle promise of a clear sky. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, the story rippled through the city. It was a quiet scandal, a topic of hushed conversations in coffee shops and grocery store aisles. I never spoke to the media again. I didn't have to. The truth, once spoken, had a life of its own. I moved out of the small apartment I'd been renting and found a little cottage with a garden in the back, a place that felt like it was mine from the moment I stepped inside. I started the legal process of obtaining my original birth certificate, a journey into a past I had never known. It was a slow, quiet process, a stark contrast to the chaotic drama of the past few months. One crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from Livia. Her handwriting was shaky, the loops and lines uncertain. Serafina, it read. I got the transplant. A stranger saved my life. I've had a lot of time to think, lying here. I don't know how to apologize for a whole life. I don't think I can. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry we were taught that love was a competition. I think I was just so scared of losing, I forgot how to play fair. I hope, one day, you find a family that deserves you. I folded the letter and placed it on my mantelpiece. It wasn't a key that unlocked forgiveness, not yet. But it was, perhaps, the first honest sentence that had ever passed between us. It was a start. A few days later, another letter came, this one in an unmarked envelope with a postmark from a small town in California. The handwriting inside was young, earnest. Dear Serafina Rowe, it said. My name is Nora. I'm 16. I saw your story online. My parents always told me I should be grateful they adopted me, like I owe them something. Next month, my dad needs a kidney, and everyone just assumes I'm going to get tested. I was so scared to say no. Reading your story, it made me realize I have a choice. You don't know me, but you gave me a voice. Thank you. I held the note in my hands, the thin paper feeling momentous, sacred. Tears I hadn't been able to shed for my own pain pricked at my eyes. This was why I had spoken up. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. But for this. For the quiet validation that my story was not just my own, but a part of a larger, shared human experience. That evening, I went out to my small garden. The first of the winter roses were blooming, their petals a deep, velvety crimson against the darkening sky. I touched one gently, its soft, strong texture a miracle of nature. I had spent so much of my life feeling like a weed in someone else's carefully tended garden. But now, standing here, in this small patch of earth that was all my own, I knew the truth. I was not a weed. I had never been a weed. I was simply a flower that had been planted in the wrong soil. And now, finally, I was free to grow.